Hello and welcome to Doc Review with me, Camelia Shambayati. In this episode, we'll be reviewing The Black Panthers, Vanguard of a Revolution, directed by Stanley Nelson Jr. Joining me in the studio today, we have Kaleem Aftab, a film critic and freelance writer who writes primarily for The Independent and has authored the biography of Spike Lee, and Stafford Scott, who is a senior race advocacy officer at the Monitoring Group and coordinator of Tottenham Rights. He also occasionally writes for The Guardian newspaper on matters relating to the black community and policing. Now, The Black Panthers, Vanguard of the Revolution is the first feature-length documentary to explore the Black Panther Party, its significance to the broader American culture, its cultural and political awakening for black people, and the painful lessons wrought when a movement derails. Let's have a look at the trailer.
The Black Panthers.
Black Panthers?
The Black Panther Party.
Black Panther movement.
The Black Panthers were absolutely unique.
Being black in America meant that you didn't walk down the street with the same sense of safety and a sense of privilege as a white person. Attack dogs, fire hoses.
Police jump on you, beat you up, put the gun at your head. This is what we were going through on a daily basis.
We stand on the eve of a black revolution, brothers.
Now we have voices within the community that we're not going to continue to turn the other cheek.
We want black power. We want black power.
The Second Amendment guarantees the citizen a right to bear arms on public property.
We're going to carry our guns and we're going to follow the police. We're going to maintain a legal distance, ready to throw down if necessary.
Anyone who would approve of this kind of demonstration must be out of their mind.
God get me some. That's what I need.
These racist Gestapo pigs have to stop brutalizing our community or we're going to drive them out.
The majority of the rank and file are women.
We tried to change some of the clear gender roles. Women had guns and men cooked breakfast for children.
The way we walk and talk and dress, we were a phenomenon.
The Black Panthers really understood the media. They used us to their advantage.
Chairman of the Black Panther Party, and here he is.
They tapped the phone. The phone is probably hooked up to the White House.
You read the Black Panther Party newspaper?
Yes, I do.
Why?
Because I'm black and I'm proud.
The FBI wanted to destroy the Panthers.
How about justice? Justice is incidental to law and order.
This was all-out attack on the Black Panther Party. Every significant office is going to be raided, bombed, shot, mass arrests.
They were coming to kill us.
When the 15-minute gun battle was over, 2 Black Panthers were dead.
This was obviously a political assassination.
It was like a slaughterhouse.
We were doing fundraisers at places like Jane Fonda's townhouse so that we could raise money for the Legal Defense Fund.
There were 156 not guilty verdicts. It's astonishing.
We don't hate nobody because of their color. We hate oppression.
We refer to ourselves as the Vanguard. We wanted the entire community to follow.
I feel free. I feel absolutely free. You understand? That's what I feel.
Thank you both for joining the show. So that was quite an inspirational, uplifting trailer. Kaleem, what is your first take on the documentary?
I think it gives a very good general oversight of the Black Panthers. There's no real single truth there. So if you don't know much about the Black Panthers, it's a great introduction and to a lot of themes. It touches on so much that at times you're racing to catch up.
And what kind of themes are you touching upon?
Well, they're touching upon obviously the race theme, why the Black Panthers came up in the 60s, but then also other aspects like how their fashion become part of the black aesthetic that we still see today in hip-hop videos and things like that. And so it's very broad, and then it goes further into individuals and the splits that eventually led to the demise of the Black Panthers.
And we'll touch on that in a bit more detail a bit later on. Stafford, would you agree with Kaleem? What's your take on the documentary?
I agree with Kaleem wholeheartedly. That I think it's a refreshing documentary that helped to remind some of us that are old enough to have not necessarily lived through all of that time, but been aware of it. It was around us. It kind of just reminded us of what a awesome time it was. Horrific time in terms of the police brutality and such that black Americans were facing, but awesome to see young people coming together, to stand together, to resist in a way that had probably never happened before in a major Western country or city.
And from the film, what are some of the key messages the documentary tells us about the Black Panther Party?
I suppose it's the message of the Black Panthers, really, and it's that message of resistance and defiance. But it also showed that they were an eclectic mix of people, and that they probably grew too fast, too rapidly, and that they tried to do things at two very different extremes, from survival programs, which was working and serving the communities, to fronting off and standing up and running the caravans and standing up armed struggle with the police and police forces. And it also tells us clearly that the levels that the state was willing to go to then to deny black voices and to deny black communities justice and opportunities to have their concerns voiced and heard, the levels they'll go to deny us those opportunities are very similar to the levels they'll go through today. So in some ways it's taught us that not a lot has actually changed.
Killian, do you think the documentary helps debunk some of the myths that are out there about the Black Panther Party?
It depends what you mean by the myths, but I think what it does help do is it shows that this is a movement for change. It's a movement that has inspiration for the Black Lives Matter movement of today. It's a movement that it also shows that the American government were against them, because not only were they trying to talk about race, they were trying to talk about society at large. One of the talking heads in the film talks about it being an anti-capitalist movement, where they're trying to feed education, they're trying to create a more socially just society, and it's against oppression. So I think that's what it teaches us, but also it teaches us that oppression has a lot of power, and the FBI were very clever in the way that they manipulated and put insiders into the Black Panther movement, and so the spies would undermine the movement as a whole.
Let's just have a brief break now from the discussion and watch a clip from the film which talks about the struggles the Black Panthers faced and mentions the story of Fred Hampton, who was the chairman of the Illinois chapter of the Black Panther Party.
We used to call the Panther Party the Vanguard of the movement, because they were out in the forefront. They were kind of setting the pathway. The things that we would face some repression for, they would face it 10 times as great. They were sacrificing oftentimes their lives in the struggle.
And these people in this class have divided themselves. They say, I'm black, and I hate white people. I'm white, and I hate black people. I'm Latin American, and I hate hillbillies. I'm hillbilly, I hate Indians. So we fight amongst each other.
Fred Hampton here in Chicago was the main voice for racial unity.
Black Panther Party stood up and said that we don't care what anybody says. We don't think you fight fire with fire best. We think you fight fire with water best. We're going to fight racism, not with racism, but we're going to fight with solidarity.
So there was Fred Hampton there, and he's used in the film as an example of one of many members who was symbolic for racial unity in the Black Panther Party. And there are many characters in this film to juggle. Who do you think was the main character for you, historical figure that stuck out most to you?
From the film?
From the film.
For me, probably it was Huey P. Newton and Edward Cleaver. They're kind of the yin and the yang. One was very eloquent, and one was the literary voice of the movement, and the other was kind of the face of the movement. And the way they split and divided is key, I think, to the film, and that sticks out. And Fred Hampton was kind of in the middle of that, and the way that he died was one of the moments that split the party, how to react to that.
How successful do you think the film was in portraying these characters? Do we, as an audience, learn enough about them?
I think as an audience we learn a sufficient amount about them, especially if you have no background in it. But I feel that it also, because it's a feature film, it just gives you touches and glimpses of them. I would have liked to have known a bit more about the influence they had on the communities, and as it was developing, what the power they held was, what the community felt about them, before we found out a bit more about their split.
And Stafford, from the film we learned that the FBI wanted to prevent the rise of a so-called Black Messiah. Right, so was Fred Hampton seen as sort of this rising figure, and was he seen as a threat to the FBI?
I think that the threat doesn't just come with him trying to unite people. I think the threat comes because he, the two characters that we just heard about, he kind of was in the middle of them. So he was probably the one that wasn't only going to just unite the black community, but was also going to bring in other allies as well. So of course that becomes perceived as a bigger threat to the state. The character that I like the most throughout the documentary is the one that I liked the most growing up, and that's Bobby Seale. Because I think that of all of them, he was the one who was probably most in tune with the local communities. And he was the one that I think that was more looking to serve communities and represent communities rather than build a political party, even though he ends up ultimately running to be the mayor of Chicago. I think he's a fantastic character. And when he's arrested and he's in court and they chain him and they gag him and he won't stop and he won't give up, you know, that defiance that he actually shows. And ultimately to see him leave the Panthers before the Panthers is even officially over, I think was one of the saddest parts, not just of the documentary, but of the Panther Party history in total.
Right, of course. And since the time of the Panthers, we've seen numerous examples of police brutality against black people in the US. For example, in the 90s, we've seen the police beating of Rodney King. And in more recent times, we saw the fatal shooting of Michael Brown and resulting in the Ferguson unrest and subsequent riots. How has race relations changed in the treatment of black people since the time of the Panthers?
You mean in the States? You mean
in the States, or yeah, and in general?
It would appear that it hasn't changed, has it? In real terms, it now seems the police can actually go out and just shoot black people with very little redress. We saw redress in the case of Rodney King. I heard a statistic recently that post the election of Donald Trump, 43 black people have been shot and killed by police officers in the United States. That's since November till now. So nothing's changed, and if it has changed, it's certainly not for the better. Black people are seen as expendable. We've seen how COINTELPRO is about government, it's about the police, and it's about the media. Also creating stereotypes of black people and the black community that somehow then has the impact of further marginalising, isolating them from the mainstream, and also creating all of these stereotypes. So it means that our lives mean very little. They paid out $1.28 million for Fred Hampton's murder. And I think $1.28 million isn't that much in an American budget. Our lives are cheap, we're expendable. And that was so in the 60s, that gave rise to the Panthers, and it's so today. Unfortunately, I think that the Panthers made a historic and heroic attempt to stop it.
I want to touch more on activism a bit later on, but for now, let's take another look at a clip from the Black Panthers' Vanguard of a Revolution, which talks about how the state was trying to take down the Black Panthers.
In other cities, the Panthers were under physical attack from police departments. But New York City was going to handle its Panther problem differently. They created a conspiracy case that allowed them to arrest the entire leadership of the New York City Black Panther Party.
A New York grand jury has indicted 21 alleged Black Panthers on charges of plotting several bombings in the city tomorrow.
On April 2nd, 1969, in pre-dawn raids, 21 Black Panthers were charged with all kinds of terrorist activity.
These are some of the men the police are accusing of being involved in the plot which could have wounded or killed scores of busy New Yorkers. 12 men were arrested today, 2 are already in jail, and 7 more are still at large.
And so the Panther 21 started.
So we learn from the film that the Black Panthers were being attacked on all fronts, be it financially, reputation-wise, through infiltration, physically. Kaleem, what do we learn from the film about how the Black Panther Party was perceived as a threat to the US government?
I think what we learn is something that's unsurprising to anyone that follows the history, We see it through the character of J. Edgar Hoover mostly, who's become this kind of comic book villain over time. But, you know, he ran the McCarthy witch hunt against communists. He then followed that up against this witch hunt against the Black Panthers. And he's this figure that kind of seems funny now, but was deadly serious to everyone at the time. He was the forefront of pushing through anything he could to undermine the Black Panthers. His biggest fear was that the white, as said in the film, is that the white community would start to support the black community and start to rise up with them, which we saw partially happen in the civil rights movement, which is why all these changes happened.
And for you, was that the turning point in the fall of the Black Panther Party from the film?
I think the turning point is that they push through, and the system, the government system, pushes through enough divides, enough conflicts, enough reasons for people to turn against each other. The arrest, the false arrests, the courts going even against the government system, all combine to create this tension. And from that tension, you have a divide between the members of the community, so that it's classic divide and rule.
And what about you, Stefan? Would you agree with Kaleem's analysis there? Why was the Black Panther Party seen as a threat to the US government?
They're the only ones that were standing up to them at the time, to be quite honest. And I suppose it's the nature of the way that they oppose the government. And some of them actually called for the overthrow of the government. But this was the beginning of poor people coming together. I could well imagine if the American government was saying that, you know, if we allow the blacks to rise up in this way, they're going to make links with other sections of society, and ultimately we're going to get people who are opposed to a capitalist system that are going to want to overthrow it. So for those reasons, they wanted to undermine it and bring it down. But let's not forget the role that racism and white supremacy plays in all of that.
And what role does that play?
Well, it's the role that they have to be the dominant voice and the dominant force at all times. And it's the role that says that we cannot and will not allow or accept any kind of challenge. And if that challenge comes, we have to smash it to smithereens as soon as we possibly can.
A powerful
There's
words there.
also the history of slavery. So we have this 400 years where blacks were completely subjugated. They're finally getting a voice. And the civil rights movement, as the film points out, was largely of the South. But the Black Panthers had this broad appeal because they were appealing more to just their own side. They were appealing to people who wanted social justice. The Vietnam War was going on. There's all these cracks appearing in American society, and they were pushing the buttons that were the right buttons, and therefore the system wanted to react.
Right. And I want to touch more on that in the next part, in the rise and fall of the Black Panther Party. And let us now take a look at our final clip from the documentary, where it praises the Black Panthers for their ability to grab the media's attention.
Obviously, photographers were drawn to the Panthers.
Well, we hear a great deal about the Black Panthers.
Black Panthers.
The Black Panthers. The Black Panthers were absolutely unique.
The Black Panthers.
The Black Panthers. Black Panthers.
Black Panther Party.
Black Panther movement.
Black Panther Party.
Black Panthers.
I think the Black Panthers really understood the media. They knew what we were after. They knew what we were focusing on.
The Panthers has amounted to...
You might say that we exploited the Black Panthers, but I think there's a lot of evidence that they used us to their advantage. They were able to establish their legitimacy as a voice of protest.
The chairman of the Black Panther Party, and here he is.
Kaleem, what role did the media play exactly in the rise and the popularity of the Black Panther Party?
No, that's an interesting question, because I think the media was a reaction to the rise and popularity of the Black Panther Party, and they were able to use things that they could see in the media, such as when they create an event or they create a news story, that the media will react to that, Also, they were able to use celebrities such as, you saw John Lennon in that clip, but there was also Marlon Brando. They looked at how the media worked and they exploited it. I think the media then reported on them, as they should have done, and therefore when the population at large read what the Black Panthers were actually about, that was what their popularity was about. It wasn't about the media per se.
Stafford, what role did the media think played in the rise of the Black Panthers? Did it help or hinder?
Well, it depends on the section of the media you're looking at, because the Black Panthers had their own paper. And that definitely helped, because that was then what was able to fund their survival programs and such. Mainstream media, again, is no different from today. They like sexy, salacious stories. So you know, if you get any militant group, they'll be there. Look at the mainstream media nowadays, how they flit around with UKIP. I mean, they're around UKIP so much that they've helped to actually bring them a level of respectability, not to compare the Black Panther Party with UKIP, but to talk about the power of the media. And in the States, again, the media, what the media did was focus on certain characters. So it helped that whole thing around the cult of personality. But it also meant that many more people outside of Oakland, for example, were able to see what was happening there, and they were able to copy, parody it, and also to join in the Black Panthers. But the media would also have created an environment that enabled law enforcement and government to then make them the targets and go after them. And clearly what the media didn't do, which is what it should do, was hold government and the police, for example, to account. So the media always kind of plays a dual role in these situations.
I mean, at the time as well, you have the media that was against the Vietnam War, some of it. You had the media that was looking at Nixon and they were against Nixon. So there were other things that the Black Panther just contributed to be part of. There was another agenda. And when that agenda was satisfied, the black agenda disappeared from their pages.
Final 30 seconds. Do you think today's activists can learn a lot from the Black Panther Party?
Absolutely. I think today's activists need to learn a lot from the Black Panther Party. I heard the name Black Lives Matter mentioned throughout the show. They could learn a lot, because what the Black Panthers show is not just about rhetoric. It's not just about having an education and having your voice heard. It's about serving community, understanding community, and being a part of that community. But most significantly, it's about sacrifice.
We'll have to end on that powerful note. Thank you so much for your time. And that's it for the episode of Doc Review. Thank you to both my guests and for you for watching. Be sure to follow us on Facebook and Twitter, where you can follow us at Doc Review Show. Do let us know your views on today's film. I've been Camelia Shambayati, and see you on the next episode of Doc Review.